everybody. I just want to say before we get started, we all encourage you to go back into our showcases and check out some really innovative technology, real hands-on experience. So there's a lot of cool stuff back there, so please check it out. Our next panel discussion is Turning Lives Around with Tech, and it's moderated by Marcus Bullock. He's a justice reform advocate, and he's the founder and CEO of flikshop, which is a free mobile app that connects postcards to over 2,000 correctional facilities around the country, connecting thousands of families to their incarcerated loved ones. So please join me in welcoming Marcus Bullock.
I love that music. That's what I'm talking. I need that intro every time I come in. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Thanks, Samar, and thank you to Black Enterprise for providing this platform. Turning lives of returning citizens around was a cornerstone of President Obama's agenda, and we've invited 3 other formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs who have embarked on successful paths to launch startups to share their stories. It is those stories that should signal to everyone, no matter their current circumstance, we all have the ability to succeed. First, from incarceration to urban entrepreneur, I'm bringing out Divine, and he founded his first financial services and technology startup, Black FinTech. With little education and technological knowledge, he utilizes his extraordinary life story and journey of redemption to inspire people worldwide. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Black FinTech and Black Enterprise contributor, Mr. Divine. Next, Teresa Hodge is the founder and managing director of R3Score, a web and mobile responsive employment matchmaking software specifically for people with an arrest and/or conviction record. Please welcome Ms. Teresa Hodge. And rounding out our panel is Shaka Senghor. A leading voice in criminal justice reform, Shaka is a senior fellow with the Dream Corps and president and creative director of Mind Blown Media. His memoir, Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison, an unforgettable tale of forgiveness and second chances, was released in March 2016 and debuted on both the New York Times and Washington Post bestseller lists. Please welcome Mr. Shaka Senghor. Come on, have a seat on right here, brother. All right, let me get comfortable, man. There we go. All right. How's everybody doing this afternoon? It's late in the afternoon, and typically this is the time after you eat lunch where you start getting the itis. Acting like I'm not the only person that happens to after you eat in the afternoon. But it's really cool to be able to be here in this environment, sharing this stage with my esteemed panel here. It's an incredible opportunity. More times than not, working inside of the tech space, I'm not really in a room with this many black folk. So this is really, really cool, and I'm so happy to meet and shake hands with a lot of you guys, because not only are you guys influencers in the space that you are working in, but we all share a very common objective. And one of the biggest conversations I see that we're talking a lot about is diversity and inclusion. And of course, coming from a background as a convicted felon, I like to be able to be a part of that conversation. So I'll turn it over to you guys. I want to take a quick second before we really jump into this conversation. If you can tell me a quick 1-minute piece about yourself that I didn't cover inside of your bio. And I'll start with you first, Divine.
I'm an artist. I'm a creative. I have a strong passion to affect people's lives in a way that in a unique way that I haven't seen done. And just using my life story as a way to really do that and project that change on my own life on them and make that change with those. So.
Yeah, cool. Teresa?
Yep, for me, I am a person who, before I went to prison, I was an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur. So when I went to prison, I just became a social entrepreneur with a different population. And today, what excites me the most is just creating pathways to opportunities for people who have arrest or conviction records.
Hey, how y'all doing? Y'all good? Y'all good? I was an entrepreneur as well, different product. No judgment, no judgment. I know, but I'm really excited about being able to use the various platforms I work on to highlight the realities of what incarceration does, not only to the individual, but to families and communities. We have a new show out on the Oprah and Winfrey Network called Released. Encourage everybody to go out and check that out. It's really about families welcoming their loved one back home. Yeah. And it's just a great way to intersect arts, technology, and storytelling to really change communities.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to be on this panel, especially at Black Enterprise, and all of us being entrepreneurs. I mean, I built Flikshop because when I was in prison, I grew up inside of a prison cell, and growing up in a prison cell, you realize how important mail is. There's no internet and all that kind of good stuff, and there's no Facebook, no Twitter, none of that. And so we wanted to be able to use our technology to keep the families not only connected, but to really build a better and stronger pathway to reentry, using postcards. I know that all of you guys are entrepreneurs, but there's a lot of impact that's behind the work that you guys are doing. I want to really start with you, Devon, because I think it's really interesting that you're tackling this Black fintech space. Tell me, what are you doing from an impactful standpoint? Like, where's your work? Where's the heart of your work stand, and why do you do it?
I think, if you look at the name Black, it's an acronym that stands for Building, Leverage, Acquiring Knowledge. And all my life, no matter where I found myself, I always leveraged knowledge to get me to that next level. Albeit it was in a negative space and doing negative things, I'm always able to leverage that. So I kind of took that process throughout my life and kind of applied that to the company. And with the social impact initiative that we have is where we give that knowledge back through financial literacy and entrepreneurship education. And I really wanted to take it just beyond financial literacy to say, once we give a person that component, then how can we show them and teach them how to leverage that to go to the next level, to build wealth?
Yeah, no, that's dope. Teresa, I think it's interesting with you. I mean, as a Black woman and as an entrepreneur, I mean, there's tons of work. I mean, we've done panels before. I mean, we're both in DC. We've worked together a lot on projects. Tell me, what is driving the work that you're doing, and what are some of the challenges that you see coming inside of this space, especially in the tech world?
Right. Well, what drives the work I do is the fact that, if we look at data, the FBI has 100 records of people who have an arrest or conviction record. 70 million Americans are living with an arrest or conviction record. That's 1/3 of the population. And the R3 score is designed to disrupt the background check, because for many people, when you check a box, whether it's online on a paper application, from the moment you check it, you're disqualified from employment. And we can't afford to leave 1/3 of the population out of the working space. So for me, what drives what I'm doing is just trying to get people back to work. Last year they said there was 5.6 million jobs that went unfilled, and yet 65 million Americans were facing workforce discrimination because decision makers don't know how to assess a person who has a criminal background. And we leave people stuck in possibly what was their worst mistake for the rest of their lives. And so it's just really creating those pathways to help people get back to work, take care of their families, because when I was in prison, everybody who I met, all they talked about was coming back home and being productive members. But we've just made coming home so challenging that people can't, a lot of people go back to prison. 65% of the population goes back within the first 3 years. And it's not because prison life is a great way of living, it's because coming home is more challenging than living in prison.
Yeah. But it sounds like you're building almost like a FICO score with R3. And you're using that, like how are employers able to use that technology to help, build out, especially, ones that are very, where diversity is very important, and especially inclusion for us.
And we actually studied the FICO model because we wanted to bring to the market a tool that people were familiar with. So everybody was familiar with the FICO range. And so our score is a range. We do color coding, and we actually have a score. We have over 300 questions that we ask a person because, yes, we want to tell you that they've been to prison, but that's not enough. We need you to know who they are, what's their capacity, how have they navigated away from crime so that they can be productive again. So you can get a score from 300 to 850. And that score will help you. And with decision makers, it's something that they're familiar with. They're familiar with a FICO score, a credit score. So in this case, we're trying to say, yes, if a person is a 720, and you know what 720 means to you as it relates to credit or employment, it means the same thing for this population.
Yeah, that's really cool. Shaka, so there are about 700,000 people every year coming home from prison. 70 million of them, 70 million people around the country are living with an arrest record. Why is it that so many of us that are coming home from these facilities, why is it that we are forced into entrepreneurship? Or a better question is, how can others coming behind us successfully move into that path of entrepreneurship?
I think it's a natural progression. Most of us grew up with that model, you got to use what you got to get what you want.
Yeah.
And one of the things I discovered when I was incarcerated was that I actually was an entrepreneur. And again, I know we made a joke earlier about it being an illegal product, but when you really think about the processes, right? Management, the ability to acquire resources to create profit margins, great profit margins, all those things we already have. And so we realized that coming out, nobody's going to hire us, nobody's going to give us an opportunity to live in places that we can actually afford. And so to me, I just think it was a natural progression of really creating opportunities for ourselves. And, when you think about, what's happening in the prison system. So I had a fellowship at MIT Media Lab. Coming out of prison, I had been home probably about 2 years, because I'm actually an urban nerd. But I had this fellowship, and one of the things that I realized was that the iteration that was taking place in the media lab, the same thing was happening behind bars, but it was called something different. Yeah. And you're further criminalized when you have to innovate in order to survive and be resourceful in an environment where they try to marginalize you and limit your creativity and your genius. And so one of the things that I knew my responsibility was to highlight the reality that genius does exist in these environments, that you have amazing entrepreneurs who have high-level skill sets, but we just have to create a different pathway for them to intersect in society. And sadly, we weren't doing that. But now we're in a space where I can go anywhere, and I'm meeting formerly incarcerated men and women who are great entrepreneurs, who have great vision, and now they're modeling that behavior for the men and women behind, and largely because we're left out of the job and employment market when we get out of prison. So I highly encourage it. I write my guys and be like, yo, sharpen up your business plan, increase your acumen in the areas that you care about so that when you actually get released, you can just move forward with your life.
Yeah. Teresa, I want to piggyback off of one of the things that Shaka just said, and it sounds like a lot of people that are behind these cells, right, we're almost forced into entrepreneurship. And I know we talked about this a little bit even earlier this morning. Do you feel as though we're forced into entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. I'm a data nerd, so 60% of the people who come home from prison can't get jobs. And then the people who have jobs earn 40% less than everyone else, their peers. So entrepreneurship is not a thing that's nice to do for this population. It truly is a necessity that he was talking about. Yeah. The hard part is when we think of inclusive entrepreneurship, and when we look at, African Americans and, we're fighting for inclusion, the reality is people who have arrest or convictions need an on-ramp just to be a part of the inclusion of inclusive entrepreneurship.
What does that on-ramp look like?
Well, when people come home from prison, they don't have jobs, housing, and all of these other things. So you have to first stabilize an individual before they're able to think about starting a business. So for many people, when we think of, everybody was trying to fund a lot of entrepreneurship for people with convictions, and then they realized unless you give stipends, unless you really anchor and stabilize a person post-incarceration, they can't focus on their business unless they have tremendous support networks. There are unique situations here and there, but we've got to get away from creating a unique situation. How can we create more Shakas, more Divines, more Marcuses? That's what we have to do.
Yeah. Divine, I want to come back over to you here. So we're here, we're in San Francisco, we're having an awesome time. You're on the main stage, get an opportunity to be able to talk about the work that you're doing. Did you dream about these moments when you were inside?
Nah, I can't say I specifically dreamed about Silicon Valley. And to point out some things that they were speaking on is, I never knew Silicon Valley existed. I never knew technology outside of it, me using technology to create music existed. When I met Ben Horowitz and I came into the space and I saw what it was, I saw the power, I saw the opportunity, I knew that I had to figure something out beyond just being a rapper, beyond just making music. How can I really get in this space? And when I did get in that space, how could I use it to empower not only myself, but empower everybody else around me? Individuals that come from the same background as I came from. Yeah. You know, and I always say entrepreneurship is a new street hustle. Yeah. You know, how do individuals take that opportunity or take entrepreneurship and leverage it in a way where you can just become empowered, where you can change the lives of so many other people beyond just yourself. Yeah. And that's where that social impact component, I was really focused on that, creating that piece. So that's when we created the Black Wealth Platform, which we delivered that curated financial literacy and entrepreneurship education component.
Why is that necessary, walking out of the doors of a prison cell?
I mean, I think it's necessary. When you look at people in underrepresented communities, our mindset is survival, right? And when you look at the mindset of someone that's surviving, they're more determined than a lot of different people. They're very innovative, and they take higher risks than a normal individual would take. So I'm thinking that knowledge is that foundation that's necessary to take somebody from A to Z. And we come from the hood, so in the hood we don't have the mentorship, we don't have the resources. Yeah. I didn't even have the awareness of Silicon Valley or technology until I met Ben Horowitz, and that shifted my whole mindset, shifted my whole perspective. Then I naturally started using my overall entrepreneurial thinking and said, how can I create something from this? How can I create something from nothing and turn it into something?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. We had a conversation last night about how we both came from the street hustle, and I grew up with everyone around me selling drugs, so I started selling drugs. And then I went into prison as a teenager. I was 15 years old when I went to prison. Where in your situation, it was a little bit different. You went in a little older, but you came home, and did you reoffend? What were the challenges of coming home and then, because there's a huge gap in between that release date and this moment today where you're able to talk about injecting some of your technologies inside of the world. Like how do you bridge that gap? And I guess I'm really asking that for all the people that are coming behind us who really want to know, how do you do that?
Yeah, so my challenge was, I had a criminal record. I had no real work history. So that was a challenge within itself. And as Teresa pointed out, trying to get a job, marking that box that you're formerly incarcerated or you have a criminal record. I used to never want to do that. I felt ashamed to do that. And something Shaka Senghor talking about, you can't be ashamed of that, that background and being formerly incarcerated. You really have to own that in a way. And if you look at what I've done since 3 years ago to where I'm at now, I've embraced everything about what was wrong about me, right? I embraced being incarcerated. I embraced only having an 8th grade formal education. I embraced these things, but I flipped the story around where it was positive and not negative. And I reshaped my whole existence. And that's why I'm on the stage today, to be able to do this type of work that I'm doing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Teresa, let me ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced? Because your story is a little interesting because you went from the nonprofit space, launching a nonprofit, creating everything from these convenings where people like me can come and learn and meet great people, these hackathons, and then now you're building technologies and you're really thinking about how you're going to scale that. What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now?
I think the challenge is being Black, being woman, being formerly incarcerated Black woman. It's kind of that being a first-time tech entrepreneur. I've started a business before, but now I'm starting tech. So it's an unfamiliar space, and we're talking about a population where in many instances people discredit or they don't understand the population, they don't understand the size of the population. And in some cases, in spaces that I've been in, it's like we've determined who's worthy of opportunity or not. And so, it's humanizing a population. And often I tell people, I was like, there's no ecosystem that supports this population. Yeah. So often I feel like I'm building a road and I jump back in the car and I ride as far as I've built, only to then jump out the car and go build another, plank in the road so I can ride a little bit further down the road. So it's really just having an ecosystem and letting people understand that there's a third of the population that has this problem. And we are the best people with the lived experience, most equipped to create the solutions for this particular problem. And so we've just got to shift the paradigm so that we're not far away from the resources. Because, when you talked about 700,000 people coming home from prison, it's 700,000 families that have an opportunity to reconnect and to be able to become a part of the working society, paying taxes, and contributing. And when we help everybody out, it's like we're going to have a better, society. It is a public safety issue in addition to just it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. So when I was released from prison in 2004, I was about 23 years old. I was 23 years old. And I served almost a decade of my life inside of a prison cell. And growing up in prison is a little, it's very interesting, but you don't have an opportunity to gain a lot of the skill sets that are necessary, especially to penetrate these kinds of spaces. So when I came home, while it was very, very hard for me to find a job, I was finally able to land a job inside of a small paint store. I was the guy that mixed paint behind the register. When you want to come in and you want a blue, you would come see me. I knew all 117 different colors of blue and how to create it. Who has that job? Like, who creates the names of all of these blues? Eventually, I was able to take that opportunity as working as a guy who makes paint in a paint store and turn it into a painting business. The Miss Johnsons of the world would come in, hey, Marcus, how much do you charge to paint my kitchen? I'm like, we don't paint kitchens. We sell the paint so that you can paint your kitchen. But then the painters of the world, they would come in and they would say, Marcus, it's really hard out here, it's no work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Miss Johnson, just get light bulb. And so I started Perspectives Painting Contractors. Perspectives Painting Contractors grew to a full construction firm where we have 18 employees now, and 80% of our staff are other returning citizens as well. And then that is what, the revenue that I was able to generate from that construction business is what gave me the ability to be able to launch a tech company and flikshop. And so now that we're growing flikshop and it's scaling, it's interesting because I'll get to come to environments like these and I'll get to talk to people. And it's great because the connections and the network that you begin to build while you're here, especially coming from an environment that I've come from or that we've come from collectively, it's a challenging space to be in and to be an entrepreneur. And so one of the questions I have, actually I'm gonna pass this down to you, Shaka, is it's more of a statement and then I wanna ask a question behind it. So it's really challenging as an entrepreneur to get this level of success coming with that F that stands for felony on your chest. So my question to you is, how do we create more of an equitable environment inside of this ecosystem that we're building now so that other entrepreneurs don't have to build, like a award-winning mobile application like flikshop or, you have friends like Oprah, to be able to, like, how do we do that, right? I mean, if I want to come home and I just want to start a lawn care service and I want to be successful at it, I'm still competing against those other men and women who have successfully done it before me, and I have no idea how to do it. How do you create more of an equitable environment for those coming behind us?
I mean, I don't even think that should be our motivation, to create a more equitable environment because it's not realistic in a competitive marketplace. It's very competitive, right? So I think one of the things that we have to do is create a model of how do you work smarter and not harder. And that starts with understanding what do you have naturally. Coming from this space, so, just to give some context, I was in prison for 19 years. 7 of that was in solitary confinement. I started my first business while I was in prison. And I'm a writer, I started off publishing books, published that first book from prison, and I got sued immediately after I published the book. Before I even got out of prison, they sued me for the cost of my incarceration. And fortunately, I had the skill set to maneuver.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Let's back up there.
Yeah.
Who sued you for the cost of your incarceration?
So the Department of Corrections sued me for the cost of my incarceration. And basically what they said is that they would take 90% of anything that I made. But what they didn't account for is that I worked in the law library. And I was a little bit smarter than they anticipated. I knew more about contractual law than they had prepared for. So
yeah.
90% of that check.
Yeah. Basically, so what I did, and this is what I mean about working smarter, the more information you know, the easier it is for you to leverage the other things that you know. What I did is I backdated a contract, which they couldn't prove. Statute of limitations over, so I don't care now, I can talk to y'all. But when it was time to go to the hearing, I said I would only accept 10% of the proceeds once the company recoups its production costs. And the lawsuit was only binding as long as I was in prison, so I ensured that we didn't make a profit until I got out of prison. And so they basically won the lawsuit, but I'm a little smarter than y'all think I am. Campaign, right?
That's right.
But I say that to say this is that we have to, especially those of us who come from the streets and come from the environment. I think that the idea that things are going to be equitable is just unrealistic. So what's more realistic is saying, here's how to work smarter with these things. Arm yourself before you get out. Learn as much as you can. And I feel like that's our responsibility. That's what we do now. Like, we feed that back to the community. Like, me and you met in D.C. through my work of coming in and speaking to other young men who are actually on their way to prison and saying, look, here's the steps you're going to need to take before you actually get back out. Because society is very unforgiving. We would hope that one day we'll be able to say, these are our brothers and sisters, let's welcome home, healthy and whole, and that's what my work is geared for specifically. This is why we're doing the show. But it's a hard work ethic. It's grinding, the same grind you had in the streets. You just have to have that same grind, but you got to be smarter about it. So when I walked out, I knew it wasn't anybody going to hand me anything. And what I think that we don't prepare for is failure, because there's so much pressure on you getting out. When you're walking out of prison, they tell you you can't drop a dirty. You have to get a job. You have to pay your supervision fees. You have to be on your curfew. You have to do this. You have to do that. And so it's so much pressure on you to fail when you don't get that first opportunity. That tends to make things unravel. And what we have to teach is that failure comes with this. Like, you can't grind.
It's a part of the journey.
Without failing at some point, right? Yeah. But the thing is, what are you going to do when that happens? Like, how are you going to push through? Like, I was out the trunk with it before there was an Oprah. Yeah. I'm out the trunk with it, And
I met you pre-Oprah days. So
but I mean, even just that consistency of taking those no's, people who wouldn't buy books, people who was like, oh, you used to be the guy in the street, now you a corny dude in the park selling books. They know I'm not corny now, though. But the reality is pushing through, understanding the marketing aspect, and not being ashamed to say that you want success. Because that's part of it. Is like, I don't, when people were like, were you surprised that you met Oprah? Were you surprised that you was a New York Times bestseller? Like, no. I set very high goals for myself. I believe if you're going to do it, be great at it. Like, period. And like, we have to stop minimizing our greatness, and we have to stop shrinking from the possibilities of putting forth the real effort and saying, you know what, I want to be the best at whatever I do, period. And not make no excuse for it. I didn't want to be the best writer to come out of prison. I want to be one of the best writers on any platform you put me on. And that's how we have to challenge our brothers and sisters on the inside, is come out here and be the best. Because the more of us that show up like this, the more of our people say, well, who else is in there? How much other genius is inside of there? You know what I mean? So I feel like our responsibility is to always show up, win on every day, on every level, be competitive, not be afraid to be competitive, because the more resources that we build, the more people we can actually help.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation, especially here, where technologies are, it's burgeoning, is going hard. How do you connect your work with, right now, what you're doing with your media company, to the tech space, and how can others, the people that are in the room, how can they get on board?
Well, for me, like, so I really got heavy into tech as part of my fellowship at MIT Media Lab. And when I was at the lab, I did this prison hackathon. And basically, in the short version of it is, I challenged some of the best and brightest minds at MIT Media Lab to 5 design challenges based on how we survived in prison. One of those challenges was to create a tattoo gun out of a tape player motor, ink pen.
I know that all too well.
Right. And so literally, I'm sitting in the room.
Don't judge me.
We had a couple of hours with some of the brightest minds in the world, and they could not complete one of these tasks. We actually blew the power out at MIT. I was like, yes. But the simple premise of why I did it was, as working in the lab, I saw, like, I'm adding so much value to things and just instinctively knowing how to problem solve. And I'm like, okay, if one of them would have made that tape player motor, they'd have been like, oh, this is a genius, because they're an MIT Media Lab student. When you do it in prison, they say you're a disruptor.
That's a charge.
You're a troublemaker, and you end up in solitary confinement. And so my thing, what my work is about, is we have to own our stories. We have to stop allowing people to tell our stories who don't have our best interests at heart. And when I say our stories, I mean black people's stories. You know, if you're not black and you watch television, it's no way you will come in the black community.
Yeah.
Because the pathologies that show up on screen is not a true representation of the enormity of who we are. And so I feel like my responsibility is to tell the real stories and tell the stories that matter, the stories that add value to us, that humanize us, that help speak to who we are. When you watch our show Release, and this is not a shameless plug, this is a real personal, heartfelt, these are our people moment. When you watch these men and women coming home, you see family. You see family welcoming them home. You see family pooling their resources. That's what I know my community to be, but that oftentimes doesn't show up in tech, it doesn't show up in media, and now that I had this opportunity to intersect the two, I feel like it's my responsibility. You know, he who controls the images controls the destiny. It's our responsibility to take ownership of our images and utilize those in platforms that can create life-changing resources for people who are in most need of them.
Yeah, no, that's dope. That's dope. Divine, tell me, what's next for you, man?
Oh man, just really trying to build black and really make it a company that's going to be around like a lot of these big companies that's around forever. You know what I mean? Leave a legacy beyond just he was incarcerated, or he's formerly incarcerated, or he committed crimes, he sold drugs. Leave a greater legacy and leave generational wealth behind, and make that a pattern in the African American community. You can look at my story, they can resonate with my story, and be like, yo, that brother made it, this is how he did it. He used knowledge, he leveraged knowledge, he leveraged relationships, he leveraged opportunity. And that's what black is really all about, right? Leaving that footprint and that imprint in people's minds that the greatness of who we are is yet to come. You know, I look back at the past on Black Wall Street and how they had so little but did so much. And today, we don't even have the same output like they did back then. We're talking like 1910, right? So I want to make sure that we reiterate those stories and bring those into the present, and we duplicate or replicate those processes that made something like Black Wall Street flourish. And that's what Black is all about. I'm also connected with a great organization called the Last Mile Program. It's an organization that teaches inmates how to code in San Quentin, as well as entrepreneurial skills. Yeah. So I'm the brand ambassador for that. So that's an honor to be involved with that.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the Last Mile Program, where they're teaching men and women how to code while they're still in facilities. Teresa, if you were in a facility, in a prison facility, do you think that kind of educational course would have added a little bit more to your trajectory?
Absolutely. I think anytime you're doing anything that you're bringing hope in to a facility and you're exposing individuals to what's happening in the real world, because people are blocked away from the real world. And so the more that we bring that in, without a doubt, it's going to change the trajectory of a lot of people.
Did you have access to that kind of programming while you were there?
Absolutely not. There was no training. I mean, outside of GED, there wasn't anything for me when I went to prison. But I was an entrepreneur. I was a business person. So, like Shaka, I was writing business plans. I was dreaming of this day and other days that I have not yet realized along the way. I was writing and I was figuring out what I was going to do. I knew going into prison, the one thing I was going to know the most when I came home was prison. Yeah. And I used that time and that captive audience to learn, to listen, and to just think of solutions that would help me, but not only help me, but would help the thousands of women that I had met along that journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to use this opportunity to be able to open it up for you guys. I mean, I could do this all day with my panel, but I'd love for you guys to be able to join in on the conversation. So we'll go with the blue box.
Hi, my name is Marcy Jones, and I am the founder of Urban Connoisseurs, and I am an entrepreneur. My question is, in prison, something that does not get addressed is mental health. My sister actually is a medical social worker for the state of Department of Corrections in Washington State. And I want to know, are you guys doing any kind of collaboration with people in the mental health profession to help a lot of the incarcerated as they come out? They're dealing with things like maybe you were a father as had young children, but when you were out, you're now have adult children. How do you deal with that? Are you collaborating with people to help them with re-engaging with their family, teaching them parenting skills or anything like that, or just any kind of mental health issues. And I do want to say, I think it was 3 years ago, Seattle passed a law that you could no longer ask that question on the application had you been incarcerated. So for you, Teresa, data girl, are there any other cities or states that have that law now? And if so, which ones?
That was a layered question, so I'll take part of
it.
it. Yeah, over 50% of all of the jurisdictions in the country have passed that law, but what it really means is it's delayed in the interviewing process.
Okay.
So, and to add to that, there are a lot of jurisdictions that have passed the law, but the information hasn't passed down to the corporations, so the applications still have it. But for most of the jurisdictions, what it says is you can't ask it immediately, but you can ask it later. And so the discrimination process is just delayed.
I want to go back to you though, because the mental health piece, and even more important, the connections piece. So keeping families connected is a very important part of the entire incarceration to release process. It's the reason why we created Flikshop. We wanted to be able to create a way for families to be able to easily connect with their loved ones. The Business Journal calls this the Instagram for prisons, so that you can share moments instantly, and these moments get delivered directly to their cell. But I know that you had, your beautiful daughter, Lauren, you're getting ready to be a grandma. Congratulations to you.
Yep, that's exciting.
You don't look like you're excited. I know you're excited.
Yeah,
you need to stop
I'm really excited about
that.
that.
But what was that like going into prison and having a child and then now coming home with an adult child? And how did you merge those? How do you reestablish that relationship?
Well, for me, I went to prison with an adult child. My daughter was 22 and had graduated from college. She graduated from college on a Saturday, and my trial started on that Tuesday. So for me, I took an adult child to prison. And so there's a big difference than when you leave a child behind. And for she and I, she asked me, what was my greatest fear? And I told her my greatest fear was I would lose relevancy in your life after having really raised her. And, she's a mommy's girl. And so for her, we used the visiting time. I was fortunate in a federal facility. They did have internet, a very scaled down version. But I used that time, and I used the limited 300 minutes that they gave me to communicate. I used 240 of those minutes with her. So I would give her an 8-minute a call a day because I needed to reach out and touch her to make sure she was okay. But to go back to your question, there are a lot of what we call reentry service providers all throughout the country that provide some level of mental health, caring. There's definitely not enough. It's the mental health and the human health, HHS.
Health and Human Services.
Thank you, that one. They're coming out with statistics that saying everybody who's coming home from prison probably has some form of PTSD. People took trauma to prison. Going to prison is traumatizing. Coming home is traumatizing. So, the information, and there's more that's happening around the health area, the mental health area. But if we're honest, we don't deal with mental health as a whole in this country, period. Right. So we're really not dealing with it well as it relates to this population.
So I would definitely like to speak to this. So the mental health part is something that's really important in my work. Being in solitary for as long as I witnessed it in real time, the level of mental illness in that environment that was post-prison and, while they were in prison. And so a lot of my work evolves around that. The show we're doing called Release, we do have a Facebook page for that show that really works with families, and families are able to have this conversation. The show is rooted in the family impact that their loved ones' incarceration had on them. We think that's really important. The show Jay-Z did, Khalif Browder, that was a really important testimonial around the impact of mental illness in incarceration. And once you get out, we don't have many services set up for us to cope with transitioning back to society. So for us, it's just to constantly tell the stories, humanize people. I'm also able to work with an amazing organization called cut50.org. They drive most of the policy changes that you have seen come out of the White House. We work with President Obama's administration. We've done a lot of bipartisan work in this space. And it's tough because one of the things that a lot of times when we're in these spaces, what people think is that when we say the prison system, that is one system. Every state has its own individual system. So we're still building a lot of these resources, and our role and responsibility is to just keep beating the drum and hope that communities say, okay, well, here's what's working. How can we take something like the last mile and replicate that in Ohio and Michigan and Kentucky and these other areas where men and women are coming home? So I just try to tell stories and try to keep highlighting these issues and collaborate with amazing organizations like Cut 50. And go to cut50.org and check them out. Their director is amazing over there. Just Leadership, they're doing some incredible work. And these are the organizations that's leading the way, and our role is to just continue to support them.
Yeah. Do we have any other additional questions?
I'd like to thank you guys for your time and being here to help us and put light on what it's like to be incarcerated and come out and actually be successful. So we're out here, and it's hard for us to keep up with technology, especially like learning how to code and everything. While you guys were incarcerated for 10 plus years, coming out, did you ever feel discouraged as how much things have changed, or did it just motivate you to learn more and actually drive for it?
Yeah, I can write a book on that, so I'll let one of my panels.
You know what's interesting that you say that is that when I got sentenced to 7 years, my initial incarceration in federal prison under the crack law, the judge told me consider it like going away to college. So I literally scratched my head. I was like, okay, going away to college. I've never been to college, but I don't think prison is anything like college. But what I did do was take that to heart. And when I got inside the system, I started to focus on how could I build myself and keep myself up to speed with everybody that's in the world, at least come out at least at the same level, if not above and beyond. So I actually did take that time in prison and turn it into a university. I focused on the music business, how to become an executive in that. I learned everything from A to Z about the music space. I didn't have the credentials. So when I came out, I had a business plan ready. I had everything going. I just couldn't get the fund that I needed because of my background and me not having the credit, and not having the history. But that's a great question, and I think that you have to leverage everything you get, right? I've always had this raw entrepreneurial thinking, and I've always been innovative, and I've always wanted to learn and know more, and then take that, and then look at the skill set you have or the skills you have, and how you can bring that all together to make yourself be able to excel and succeed beyond what other people's expectations are of you. And I think I've blown a lot of people's mind in the short time that I've been doing what I'm doing. But really, to me, it's been an everyday thing for me coming from the drug space where I was very successful at a high level.
Can I add to that? So, 'cause I think I might have the longest amount of time served.
Yep.
So when I went to prison in 1991. There was no internet. Internet was just actually being created at that time. Our cell phones was like this big, and they came in this bag. And so when I walked out of prison in 2010, nearly 2 decades later, I came out to a very different world. Like cars that talk, I thought that only happened in Knight Rider when I was a kid. And it was literally like Fred Flintstone walking into an episode of the Jetsons. And I'm a quick learner. I have a high literacy rate, so I learn relatively quickly. But I can tell you it was really stressful, extremely stressful, because I didn't even know the difference between a Word document and the internet. And so every time I was working on a computer, I'm like, am I gonna give it some virus? Because that's all we heard was the horrible things about technology in there. And that was unnerving though, to come from an environment where I did have confidence coming out here, and then to come out and realize that I had to learn a whole new language on so many different levels. I mean, just to check out groceries in the grocery store, you have to you have to know at least a little bit about how technology works. I didn't know anything about emails. And so it's probably why I had 20,000 unanswered right now.
Don't try to use that as you push the reply button, man.
But I mean, it was so overwhelming. And I was really fortunate and blessed to have great people who were patient enough to say, you'll be able to let me know, first of all, I'll be okay. And so what we try to do now with my friends coming home, I try to prepare them as much as possible for the world that we live in today. Because it's tough to come out and learn a whole new language. I always just tell people, imagine if somebody just opened the door and just said, okay, you're in China now, learn Mandarin and live the world based on Mandarin right now on your own, no instructor, no teacher, and you just have to figure it out. That's what it's like learning technology when you don't have no basis for it. And so thank you for asking that question. It's such an important one.
Very good.
Hi, up here. Sorry, guys.
Oh,
She was
so
still.
sorry. She didn't have the microphone,
mic. Okay, go
but just to quickly reiterate, and I'll take your last question. So you were saying, did it make you impatient? So the question was, did the lack of technology make you impatient, especially in comparison to everyone else inside of the playing field?
It gave me anxiety.
It initially gave me anxiety, and then I was like, I got to go get it. So that's how I ended up at MIT Media Lab. Like, and within 2 years, I'm like, I'm about this life, so get to it.
Well, I'm so sorry we couldn't get to your question. We are out of time. I'm so sorry. Well, we are going to hang around for at least a few more minutes. I know, Teresa, you're like on a flight in a few more minutes. Catch any of us on the outside. We want to say thank you again to Black Enterprise for allowing us to be able to bring this kind of conversation to the main stage. And thank you guys for participating.
Ladies and gentlemen,